welcome, young and old, intelligent and stupid. You're all welcome here, to another epic episode of Mac Music Review. In this episode, we're looking at the album Pale Horses by Mewithoutyou, and this is the album cover. Pale Horses is Mewithoutyou's second album released in the 2010s, and their second to last album ever made, their second most recent album, because their last album, unbeknownst to the fans until very recently, was Untitled, which was released in 2018. Yeah, it was released in 2018. And yeah, that was their last album. They said, we're not making any more music, that's it. They ended on a really good note, in my opinion. But before that album, they released this album, and it kind of got mixed reaction from fans. Some people really, really liked this direction they went in, and some people didn't. A lot of people were conflicted over the way they decided to go about the vocals on this album, which on nearly every song in the album, it sounds like the lead singer is singing like recorded on like a really grainy microphone. He's singing and he applies a filter that makes it sound like it's coming through a gramophone, like it's coming through some really, really old microphone with really grainy, not really distorted, but just very unclear and kind of old sounding microphone and audio quality that doesn't sound that great. But then occasionally that'll break away, like in the hook on Red Cow, or it's kind of like the aesthetic that Panic at the Disco did on the song This Is Gospel, where the whole thing sounds kind of shaky and grainy, and then it gets to the chorus and then just the angelic vocals kick in. It's a sort of similar vibe they go for in some of these songs, but usually they're just use the grainy microphone, the grainy audio quality for the vocals. But the music sounds clear. Anyway, this album is about the apocalypse, specifically the months, weeks, days, and hours before the end of the world. And you kick it off with Pale Horse, which just sets the tone for the entire album. It just is a song, every time I listen to it, I imagine people with like hose, like digging, or shovels digging, and it's raining outside, and there's the sky's like gray, there's lightning striking, it's cloudy, and it's just this very like dismal picture, and it just evokes images of like skeletons and just kind of this very dark, dreary tone. No one's smiling. It's just a very vivid song, and one of the best intros to any album ever, just in terms of tone setting for the apocalypse. These are the weeks, these are the months, the weeks, the days before the end of the world, and I really feel that way when I listen to this opening track. The tracks that follow are filled with very vivid poetry that is much more striking and emotionally resonant than the poetry used on 10 Stories, in my opinion, and even more so than on Untitled or any of their albums. I think emotionally this album is really, really effective. And it's also just poetic. And it's a lot of it is like talk, singing, and I mean, this guy's known as not being the best singer. When people talk about him, they're like, he's not the best singer. And that's true, but what he's doing on this album and his way of delivery, I think, makes the songs pack more of a punch because it feels more raw and personal. A song that really gets me every single time is Mexican War Streets, where you have this fairly normal follow-up, in the context of the album, but then you get near the end of the song and he talks about standing on the top of the bridge looking over the Ohio. He says, "To heck with all the drugs my parents did," actually using the word heck, and it just, the use of that word instead of something else, and just, and then it warms my heart to watch your world fall apart. The way he says it, where he sounds like he's on the brink of a collapse when he gets out the line, and just the emotional delivery and the way the music progresses and changes depending on what part of the song you're in. And it's just a very just amazing song. It's a perfect song, and it's very, very good. It's very well written, great vocals, really, really great music. It's just an amazing song. Dorothy is the shortest song on the album, but I dare say it's one of the best. In this song, he's having a dream. It starts with a very grainy, distant vocal manipulation that's across the entire album. And it says, he's having this dream, and he was back in college, and then he sees somebody, like a ghost or whatever, and he realizes he's in a dream, and said, "If you can change your shape that easily, take the form of my dead father, I know for a fact he'd like to meet my wife. I know for a fact he'd like to meet my wife. And it's just like, dang. Every time, it's just like, it's just a slap in the face. Like, you're just listening to this album, and then you get to this song, and you're like, dang. And it's it's a very good song. The musical progression on the entire album is so good. You have songs that just start here and then they end up here. Most of the songs change in some unique way, shape, or form that just makes them so exciting and interesting to listen to every single time. And this album has the most replayability of like any other album, just because the lyrics are so dense and so packed with meaning and references to history and biblical imagery and stuff from all kinds of his own personal life, and it's just so many layers to unpack. And I think all of their albums are like this, but especially this one, more than any of the other ones, I've found this to be the most rewarding to come back to over and over and over again, because there's so much stuff going on underneath the surface and so much rich detail that you need to listen to it again and again and again to really grasp. Magic Lantern Days is a really beautiful sounding song. It's very tonally different from the rest of the album, and then it just feels like a moment of relief. It feels like a sigh. It feels like a real moment of beauty and peace and quiet, which is what you need, because well, Burnham Wood is the song that, you know, is really good. It's really, I've grown to like it a lot. It's hard to describe. The whole album is hard to describe. It's really difficult to review this thing, and all of their album for that matter. But it transitions perfectly musically into the song Rainbow Signs, which ends the album. And this album, the first half, it's 6 minutes long. The first 2 or 3 minutes, it's fairly quiet, fairly normal, actually more quiet and slow than the rest of the album for the most part. And then you have this moment where everything gets distorted and rumbles and gets strange. And then you have this explosion of sound. And then the entire world is torn apart. And the music is tearing the world apart, and the lyrics are tearing the world apart, and the vocals are showing the distress as this man is watching the world be torn apart. And I cannot describe this song, how amazing and perfect this song is. This is one of my favorite songs of all time, if not my favorite song. I want to listen to it right now. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I mean, dang. One of the best songs ever made, if not the best song ever made. I love it to death. It is so cool. And then the way the song ends, it has this outro where once again it gets quiet and he talks about this inside joke he had with his father, and he's kind of telling himself the joke and holding his own hand. And it's just, it's so good. With all that being said, Pale Horse is one of my favorite albums of all time. I just think the poetry, the lyricism on this album is just amazing. It's so dense. Every single song is worth studying, in my opinion. It's so much going on. It has the best beginning and end of like any album. I think it's on par with Blonde in terms of like intro and outro tracks, like the best beginning to an album and the best ending. I think it is on par with Blonde, and you know how amazing the first and last song on Blonde are, how amazing that works out. But I think the vocals are fantastic and work perfectly. I love the grainy aesthetic. I think it adds so much to the dismal, dark, and gray tone of the album. And the album cover adds to that theme as well. A perfect album cover in terms of the tone of the album. I love this as a concept album. It's the best concept album ever. It deals with the end of the world in the best way possible. Musically, it's so much going on. It's so dense. It's so layered. It doesn't sound like anything else. It doesn't even sound like any of their albums. It is a unique album in their discography, and they're already one of the best bands of all time, in my opinion. And I think this is the absolute proof of that statement, that they are one of the best of all time. And I'm going to have to give this thing 5 stars out of 5. You heard it here. 5 out of 5. I cannot give it any other score. It is that stinking good. And that's what I think about this album. You know, I love it to death. And it's actually, my opinions of it changed, because if you've seen my best albums of the decade, I'll try to link that in the description if I remember. If you've seen that list, you know that I said this was the 6th best album of the decade. If I updated that list, it would be much higher on the list. It's hard to say exactly what it would be, because my best albums of 2015, once again, I'll try to link that in the description. I said that To Pimp a Butterfly is better than this album, and I think To Pimp a Butterfly objectively is better than this album. So that list would look different. That list would look a little bit different if I updated it. Anyway, thanks for watching the video. You might, if you listen to this album, if you do end up listening to it, I would not be surprised if you don't like it. This is a really hard band to get into, just because the vocals are weird, especially this album with the really grainy vocals. I love them, but a lot of people, it's a big turnoff. And just in general, the guys' vocals are a big turnoff. And musically, they're kind of weird, and lyrically, they're really weird. So if you don't like this, that's fine. But I love it. Have a great rest of your day.